And now we have the pleasure of talking about where a lot of power really sits, which is in how workers organize and how workers and communities come together to develop solutions for this transition. We've got a great lineup of speakers, and I think I'm going to introduce them as they come on, just because we are, as usual, tight for time. So we're going to start off with Jake Malloy.
Are we?
Jake's an RMT organizer for offshore, and we're going to let him take it away.
Thanks for that, Gabby. I thought I was going last, but there you go. Where to start organising for change? I think I've not got anything written down. I'm just looking at my notes from the meetings I've done in the last few weeks. I think everything we've heard today is essentially putting it into practice. You know, I thought that Miriam and Joe on the last panel hit it on the head. You know, Miriam would make a great First Minister, and Joe the Energy Secretary. Fantastic. And it's that kind of engagement and organising that we're going to need to manage it and influence change. And I think communities are critical. You know, I think the people in this room reflect the fact that the trade unions are on board with it. We know what has to be done. It's how we get it done. And I think the communities are absolutely critical to that, because there's a naivety. I think I wouldn't call it an ignorance, because it's just a lack of information, genuine information, rather than the rhetoric they get from Westminster or all too often the Scottish Parliament. You know, I did a session a couple of weeks ago in a wee area of Aberdeen called Fitty. It's like a wee fishing village right down the front, which has suffered as a consequence of the oil and gas industry for decades. And there's a wee community hall. They were showing a movie which was developed by Platform and Friends of the Earth offshore. And then we had a panel debate, and it was stark, the reaction that we got from those in the community. I mean, a great wee community hall. I mean, I'm going to make a point of going back on a Friday. They're sitting up cheese and wine and all the rest of it, watching the movies. But the apathy there was staggering. It was a case of, well, there's nothing we can do. But it's too late. It's passing us by. We can't change it. How do we change it? And I said to one senior guy around about my age, I said, well, get into politics. You know, get if you can't get into politician, stand. Get involved in the local council. Get along to your council meetings and start making these demands, because that's where it's at. Until we've got society on board and understanding the criticality of this situation, then we're not going to change it, because we can do all the marches and the shouting and bawling we want, but we need to take society with us. And that's why I'm sitting here with a climate activist. You know, I mean, it was Gabby and I 2 or 3 years ago. Gabby and I 2 or 3 years ago were involved having a go with the Chief Executive of Oil and Gas UK, if you remember. Gabby started it, I had the middle bit, and then Gabby finished it. It was a great double act. But we put her in her place, Deirdre Mickey, on a day, and from that day to this, we've been working together. And I think, you know, as I said to I think it was the Greenpeace event a couple of years back, we're not going to agree on everything, but there's more that we agree on than not. And one is that we've got a climate crisis. One is that we've got an energy crisis. One is that we've got a cost of living crisis. One is that we've got fuel poverty, and we've got to address all of these issues. And we're not going to do it throwing rocks at one another. We've got to come together and do that bit in the middle, that transition piece, because if it's going to be pro-oil, anti-oil, the argument's going to be lost. And we've got to drag the politicians kicking or screaming along with us. And I say that because I was at an event on Friday past called Arctic Frontiers. Angus Robertson was there in the morning. And if you mentioned independence once, you mentioned independence 50 times. And that demonstrates, whether you support independence or no, it's neither here nor there. But that's not the issue right now. The issue right now is addressing the energy crisis. And it should be focused on that. As I said earlier, we've got to depoliticise it and get people on board with it and get people to realise the opportunities, because there's a massive opportunity here. You know, Robertson talked about the natural resources lottery. We've won it twice, and we squandered it the first time. We shouldn't have let it. We shouldn't do that the second time. He's absolutely right, but he is squandering it because it's passing us by. You know, the reality is it's passing us by. It's happening in the United Arab Emirates, and it's happening offshore. You just didn't see it. It's the same as the oil and gas industry. It's out of sight, out of mind. All you see is your electricity bill dropping through your door going up, and it doesn't have to be that way. So we've got to organise, absolutely. And we're doing it with oil and gas workers. Again, with the help of Platform and Friends of the Earth, a massive survey. The report that's just been produced, Our Power, involved thousands of RMT and Unite workers predominantly. Some GMB lads got involved as well. There was a wee bit of pushback for the GMB lads, I've got to say, but they've engaged with it. You know, I mean, they're understanding it. The workforce are understanding it, and I think, as Cliff said in our breakout session this morning, workers are getting it. We're getting it. The unions are getting it, but it's the communities now that we've got to engage with and inform them that it's no some mad lefty revolution we're talking about here. It's their future, our future, and it should be treated with the same urgency as we did with the pandemic. This is a crisis that we absolutely must influence. Otherwise, it's going to pass us by, and we will suffer as a consequence forevermore, just as we've done with oil and gas. I'll leave it there. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. One other thing, just to mention the passport. Ewan didn't say it out loud, but kind of put a plea out to every trade unionist in the room. Get into Global Wind Organisation, will you? Tell them to get their heads out their backsides and support the passport. Because if we don't get this passport sorted, then workers are going to be, I mean, the average cost to a worker I know is £7,000 to get their training done to go on a global wind site. It's shocking what's going on in that sector, and it's Global Wind. Global Wind, I'm going to say it out loud, Global Wind Organisation is the problem. Get into them. Thanks a lot.
And yeah, in case anyone missed it on the recording who's listening to this back home, Global Wind Organization. Thanks, Jake. That was great. And yeah, I think your point about getting into communities is a really good one. I'm going to pass it off next to Stuart Graham from Glasgow Trades Council. And I'm going to try to move this microphone over a bit towards you.
Okay, is that all right? Yeah, sound okay. Yep, thanks very much, Gabby. I know quite a lot of faces in the room, so yeah, I'm Stuart Graham from Glasgow Trades Council. I've been asked to speak today a bit about the organising we've been involved in from public transport and retrofitting / just transition working groups that the council are convening. So I'll try and kind of cover some broad points around this. Hopefully most of you have heard of the Free Our City campaign. We were using COP26 as leverage in conjunction with other activist groups in Glasgow to try and create the necessary political pressure, but also opportunity for free public transport to be trialled in the city during COP26, but also as, I suppose, as a wider demand for the remunicipalisation of bus services. And I think you fast forward to now and you see what's, we've all Lothian buses is usually held up as a very good example where profit isn't being stripped out from the local economy. But even if you think about the attitude that's been taken down south where bus services have been capped at £2, or the example from Germany where it was €9 for 3 months, none of that's happened with First Bus. That's certainly not happening in Glasgow. So that has continued, I suppose, the impetus and the motivation for the Free Our City to continue campaigning. So where are we at right now? Just before, well, maybe a few months before COP26, we were able to take advantage of a combination of public events that we've been doing along with continued campaigning, but particularly lobbying particular councillors to reinstate the commitment to assess the viability of free public transport that had mysteriously dropped from Glasgow's climate plan. Now, I suppose there was also a very real kind of need to participate in all the local consultations that sat with that, whether that be as Glasgow Trades Council or whether that be within the affiliate branches. But where we're at right now is a company called STUC has been awarded a contract for, there was 100 grand from the current year's budget awarded to assess that viability for free public transport and devise a fully costed system. That contract was awarded to STUC. Now, some people might know who STUC are, some may not. STUC are a multinational corporation. They're a Canadian-owned corporation, but they provide design and project management consultancy for architecture, infrastructure, and energy projects. So we're trying to engage with STUC as the Free Our City Coalition. Free Our City Coalition is currently Glasgow Trades Council, Get Glasgow Movement, which provides a lot of the technical knowledge that we rely on for this, Divest Strathclyde, Fridays for Future, Scott E3, Glasgow Calls Out Polluters, and the Campaign Against Climate Change Glasgow group. But we've been working with, for example, migrants, Organising for Rights and Empowerment, and a few of the other community groups as well, to try and bring them into the coalition because of the groups that, for the members of society that they represent. But I suppose we're in dialogue with STUC through correspondence. They've come back to say they'll talk to us, but they would like to hear our ideas on how this trial should maybe look from their perspective. They're looking at it, either trialing it as a spatial area, either kind of areas of the city or postcodes, looking at socio-demographics or socio-economic issues. So that's probably going to be looking at areas that have SMID indicators, have higher poverty issues or multiple deprivation. Whether they're looking at particular destinations based on employers and employment routes and who are the big employers, or whether it's just going to be route-based, and that would maybe be picking one or two of the most popular routes to trial that out. But what they haven't really considered, and what I suppose what we were trying to push for, was that trial for everyone in the city. We wanted everyone. What we tried to campaign for COP26 was to give everybody in the city the opportunity for 2 weeks free public transport to see what that experience would be. Because let's face it, we need to incentivise people out of their motors. We need to get the cars off the street in order to create the necessary spaces for the 20-minute livable communities and the other types of infrastructure projects that want to be trialled, but at the minute can't be trialled because there's no space or there's no public support or public incentive for that. If you're going to give a car owner the option between not using their car or the bus being slightly cheaper, they're going to continue using their car, right? If you're going to make it free, then you're going to make it something that will appeal to absolutely everyone. And that's what I suppose that's what we would like to see. And I suppose that's a position that we find ourselves recommending. We haven't met with STUC yet, but we will meet with STUC in April. I suppose that's that type of leverage that we'll be looking to put in place, because yes, we want to see people who are in poverty helped out of that poverty, and I suppose the social wealth that we want to expect, or the social wage that we get from society. But I suppose, again, this needs to be, coining Antonio Guterres, that needs to be everything everywhere all at once, kind of coining that, or taking that film title as well. There can't be this kind of, I suppose, piecemeal approach. We need to get in and about this. And if you want to give a city like Glasgow, or the citizens of Glasgow, who less than half the city are car owners, a chance to see what a viable free public transport system is going to look like and operate, then you need to give everybody that opportunity during a kind of temporal window, rather than it being, let's choose who the most beneficial recipients are going to be. So that's where we are from a public transport perspective. But I wanted to just touch quickly as well on some of the stuff we've come across over the last month or so from the Just Transition working group that's been convened by a group of councillors in Glasgow. And I suppose we were asked to participate in that, not just from the Free Our City perspective, but also looking at some of the retrofitting ideas, or some of the campaigning around retrofitting. And again, I suppose syncing with some of the energy aspect, and about the energy provision with homes, and the amount of energy that's wasted and the amount of money that's wasted for people that live in poorly or homes that aren't energy efficient, that are poorly, I don't know what the word for that is. Poorly proofed, or energy proofed. But I suppose there's a couple of things around this. We're interested in how they're going to increase the skills base for this. And whenever we're talking to one of the breakout groups upstairs, this is probably applies just as much to folk who are looking to retrain from the oil and gas sector as we're looking at trying to encourage young people to take up these types of skills. How are we going to incentivize them to take? You can put all these courses on as much as we can, but how are we actually genuinely going to convince or incentivize or encourage young people to take up these vocational courses whenever there are maybe more attractive further education courses for media or games programming or something that's not basically, energy or retrofitting or any type of those vocations? How are you going to get anybody to be interested in those type of jobs, particularly if they're young people? So we've been trying to float the idea and use a bit of leverage around a universal jobs guarantee. That would be the carrot at the end of the stick. Good, not only just talking about good union jobs, but actually guaranteeing a job at the end of that has collective bargaining, that has union recognition, that has a decent wage at the end of it. But as we were getting a presentation during the last working group in Glasgow, we also had a presentation from a London-based consultancy firm called the Transition Plan Partnership. I noticed that it's not called the Just Transition Plan Partnership, it's called the Transition Plan Partnership, TPT. Now, Transition Plan Task Force, sorry. And it was launched by the UK Treasury, allegedly to help develop a gold standard for transition plans for finance and the real economy. That's from their blurb. But it's essentially for the private sector, and this is going to apply as, to energy companies. There's no trade union representation on their board at all. Their co-chairs are the CEO of Aviva and a Treasury Minister called Baroness Payne. Then it's comprised of CEOs of, just give you a few, NatWest, WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, Unilever, Director of the Financial Conduct Agency, the head of Ørsted, which is a renewables company, the Executive Director, Jake laughed about that there, the Executive Director of the Bank of England, CEO of LESG, which is Global Financial Markets Infrastructure and Data Provider. This is the type of stuff that's going to be coming in. This isn't going to be a gold standard. This is going to be a financial services, industry-led carving up of what just transition should actually mean. And there's going to be conditionality attached to kind of just transition or transition funding after the end of this year. I think, if my memory serves me correct, December is the kind of the deadline after which these are going to be mandatory. So that's insidious enough in the fact that they're going to mandate a transition plan that the nature of which comes from the trade union movement, but without involving workers or without involving any kind of recognised leaders within the trade union movement. And I suppose it ends up just sounding like they're touting for business. They're touting for essentially providing a baseline measurement or a baseline metric for then being able to qualify for just transition funding. So I suppose for anyone that's in a trades council, I would encourage you, because although I got that interface through my role in Glasgow City Council, but it's more appropriate to have that interface as Glasgow Trades Council from the civic perspective, because I suppose if we're talking about the amount of workers that we need to incentivise around this, well, if we're looking at all the young people that are around to come on board, there aren't enough workers. If you're going to use retrofitting as an example, there aren't enough workers existing in the country to deliver that. Even if everything about face done a vote face right now and went to work on retrofitting, we have not got anywhere near the amount of workers to deliver that, let alone the amount of workers that are going to be coming through that are actually going to be getting trained to deliver that in future to a higher spec. So I suppose that was the reason for suggesting it, and I think that we need to attach a level of conditionality for that universal jobs guarantee and those type of commitments, because let's face it, whenever we're talking about some of the participants within those just transition working groups, they're going, Scottish Power is going to be involved in it, the bigger energy providers are going to be involved in it, the companies with deep pockets that at the minute are just kind of dancing around the edge and doing it from a corporate social responsibility side of things and giving crumbs. We actually need them to start digging deep. Now, this shouldn't be a charity thing. We should be compelling them. and this should be leverage that we're able to exact at a local level. However, I suppose this depends on how much traction and how much noise that we can make around this, but also how much we can use this to our advantage, because if we let it just slide, it'll just become some other industry standard that ends up becoming accepted. But I suppose if we can pressure the councillors, we can lobby the councillors, we can leverage the councillors in the right way around this, and we can get them starting to write transition plans and just transition plans, not just transition plans, but just transition plans that actually make sense, and that makes sense not just for the workforces, but the communities we represent and the communities in which we live. Okay? Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. That was really great. I was going to try to pull out one thing to summarize it, but I'm not going to actually try to do that because that was a lot of really great points. Thank you so much. All right, next up we've got Carl McHale from Power to the People.
Thanks very much, folks. Thanks for having me. As I say, my name's Carl, and I came to trade unionism, this kind of thing, through the climate movement. Maybe not your usual route, but through looking to sort of build that link between climate and trade unionism. And I think that's sort of at least what we've tried to do with Power to the People. Power to the People was founded last June to campaign against the energy crisis. I think Fraser pointed out earlier that Energy Action Scotland's in its 40th year. Well, Power to the People's in its first year, and like the fact that it's taken a direct action, it's taken that long, this is taken for fuel poverty to get to as severe as it was last summer, for a direct action campaign to start taking the fight to the energy companies and the profiteers, probably speaks to how much of an issue our energy system is, and how from production right through to when your bill arrives, through your letterbox, the energy system is rigged against us. And maybe that's why we've sort of not talked as much about fuel poverty as we should have done for a very long time now. As I said, Power to the People formed last year. It was a broad coalition of activists that came together, reaching across the constitutional divide, to not just sort of campaign against the energy crisis, but to present the alternative for a new publicly owned energy system that works for people and not for profit, and to do that publicly and unashamedly, because it's where the public are at. And I think that's something we forget, is that there's overwhelming public support for the nationalisation of utilities, and that's something that we need to carry with us when we're making these demands of people. Even Tory voters support the nationalisation of some of these utilities, right? That's how much sense it makes. It's the common sense argument. It is ideological, but it's also common sense. We formed with 3 key demands, and it was when we were teasing these 3 key demands out that I realised how complex, but also quite how penny pinching these companies are for their profits. So we were demanding at the time an immediate slash on energy bills, and end to the late fees which the companies charge. So if you're with Scottish Power and you can't pay your bill on time, or it takes you 3 days to pay your bill, you're charged up to an extra 20 quid on top. Right, that's staggering that these companies who are already making as much as they are demanding an extra 20 quid from customers who already can't pay their bills, the most vulnerable of their customers. And we demanded an end to the forced installation of prepayment meters as our third demand, which I'll come on to. And this was last year, when energy bills as an issue was incredibly salient. Folk were terrified, quite correctly, because of how much bills were going to be. So we were founded with a very clear mission to take the fight to the people who were at the root of this crisis, to the private energy companies, to private capital. We held demonstrations outside Scottish Power. We burnt bills, well, fake energy bills outside of Ofgem, which was good fun. And we had, people on the streets for the 1st of October in conjunction with Enough is Enough and the STUC. But in addition to that sort of mobilisation, we looked to education and sort of how complex the energy system is. And it's something Jake pointed out earlier, that we talk about this system so often in the abstract. So for normal folk, when the only contact you have with the energy system, as we call it, is when your bill drops through your door, right? But if you begin to break that system down, look at the key components, folk quite rightly get angry about the level of profiteering which goes on at each stage of this supply chain. So we began to produce pamphlets, held energy day schools, as well as online sessions to sort of popularise how the energy system worked and how at every level it worked against us as customers, against workers. And as a sort of as a result of our efforts and efforts of campaigns across the country, on the 1st of October, in the run-up to the 1st of October, Liz Truss made her singular intervention in politics on energy bills. And it was a sticking plaster that went on, but it was a sticking plaster that went on as a result, I think, of the efforts that were taken by campaigns across the country. And that is an instance in which, without those campaigns, I don't think there's anything to say that intervention would have happened. Tories, the people who back them, aren't the kind of people who give concessions where they are not absolutely necessary. And that concession was absolutely necessary because of the anger that was floating about at the time. So, and not to dwell on the problem, because this is talking about the positives, but I think it is worth talking a bit about the specific issue of prepayment meters. And I think this talks to how energy as an issue has risen in popular consciousness over the last year as a result of quite how high bills have got. So as I say, we, when we were founded in July last year, demanded an end to the forced installation of prepayment meters. And during this winter, the story broke in the Times about Arvato Solutions, the debt collectors, breaking into the homes of vulnerable people to install prepayment meters on behalf of British Gas. The agents who were employed by Arvato Solutions to kick down folks' doors said that their most common door they were knocking down were those of single mothers. So it totally ignored vulnerabilities, all the legal sort of bans that were put in place for this kind of thing were totally ignored. So we dug into this a bit, and it turned out that there had been 4,000 forced installations in Scotland in the 10 months to October 2022. So we wrote to the Lord President of Scotland, the big man in a wig, as we've called him, head judge, to work out quite what could be done about this. And what it actually turned out is that number of 4,000 folk who had their doors kicked down and prepayment meters installed was actually a sample number for just a few Scottish courts. No one knows how many people in Scotland have had their doors kicked down on the behest of the energy companies to install prepayment meters. No one has that data because it's not collected. So this is quite how severe the energy crisis is. And against that backdrop, I think the issue. People will tell you that the issue is beginning to go away in the popular consciousness. We're not talking about it as much as we were in the run-up to bills skyrocketing on October the 1st. But the issue is there so much under the surface for folk. Bills are going to go up again when the government remove the energy price guarantee and the 60 quid stops coming in. So we have to be where we have been since July last year, taking the fight to the profiteers, because that's really, really not going away. And as a campaign, we know, and as everyone knows, that there is so much more that can be done at every level of government on this stuff. Local government, Joe made the point earlier about what councils can do with political will, and we should be asking every council why they haven't taken the initiative that they have done in North Ayrshire. Scottish Government level, there's talked a bit about whether the Scottish Government have a plan for a just transition. To me, it looks like they do have a plan, and they're pretty blatant about it, and we can see it in Scotland, we can see it in Freeport, we can see it in the PFI deal that they signed with Nature Scot last week, which is going to outsource woodland restoration to the banks. And we have to expose that, because it's something that, if there's public support for nationalisation, were those deals that were being signed behind closed doors and without press attention by the Scottish Government and the public conscience as much as the profits of Shell and BP are, folk would care, and would care a lot more than they do as a result of most folk just not knowing about this thing, right? So I'll wrap up now because I'm going over time, but the overwhelming benefit, I think, of the last 2 years is the growth in understanding of an energy system, and it's only come about, admittedly, as a result of folk being forced to care by quite how staggering these bills have got. But as I say, we're in a position now where public ownership is a priority for the public, where public ownership is supported by the public. More broadly, though, I think the energy crisis is an issue that offers an opportunity to build this link between climate and trade unionism that we talked about earlier. It's the issue that we have to build on. It affects the climate movement just as it does the trade union movement, and we probably haven't taken the initiative in working to build those links as much as we should have done in the last year, but now's just as good a time as any to work on that link for a new, clean, publicly owned energy system highlighted by our power report, right? That's not really research as much as it's organising, getting 1,000 oil and gas workers in a room and demand public ownership. It's a pretty incredible thing when you think about it. And that's certainly something that we should be looking to build on by bringing climate activists on board to fight for that new energy system, because I think we're now in a position where it's very clearly outlined what we can do, what Scottish Government can do, what local authorities can do. We know what it needs to look like. We need to fight for it, and we need to find leverage where we can fight for it. And something that came up in our breakout group was how, when we do gain concessions from the likes of the Scottish Government, it's because their reputation's at stake. More than anything else, they value the progressive reputation, just as any government or company do. When we win, it's by exposing what actually goes on behind the scenes, and this is the perfect instance where we can expose what is effectively a carve-up of our just transition, handing our just transition to big capital. So that's what I'd like to see us do. I'd like to see, make efforts to work with the climate movement and trade union movement, bringing folk together as one to fight for a new energy system, and I'll leave it there. In fact, I won't. Connolly was quoted earlier quite correctly, and as a Hibs man, I'm not one to sort of disagree with James Connolly, but at this point we don't just want the earth, we need the seabed, the sun, solar and wind as well. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Carl. That was both sobering and inspirational in the same speech, which is very difficult to do. Unfortunately, Dominic Pritchard from GMB wasn't able to be here today. So we brought back your favorite guy for a round two. And Dave is going to talk to us a bit about BIFAB.
I'm going to mention BIFAB.
Okay, well, we'll let him go.
I wouldn't purport to be one of the industrial officers that was involved, but the STUC was involved in that campaign. There's good news and bad news here. The good news, I'm not going to speak for very long. Bad news, I'm not Dom. Good news, very good news, means that what we probably won't do after the workshop sessions is bring people back, which was basically for me just to say thank you very much, goodbye. I'll say thank you very much, goodbye at the end of the session, and then after our workshops, then we'll shoot up after that. I wanted to reflect really, really briefly on the question that Willie raised, or the point that Willie made earlier about the Just Transition Commission, although that does lead on to a couple of points that I want to make, which are really going to be centred around worker solutions and organising, which is a key element of the project, the new Just Transition project that we're going to start to support. I mean, I guess my reflection would be, and I'm kind of like halfway, Willie, I left the Just Transition Commission after the first iteration. I didn't leave it in disgust, but I was also quite glad to leave it because it's an awful lot of work. And I'm not one to herald massive achievements, because many of the recommendations that it made are still to be brought into action. But, they did include free bus pilots, which are now being prosecuted, and we're prosecuting hard. We just heard about it with the Scottish Government. It did include prosecuting the case for the offshore passport. It did include being very, very clear in its criticisms of the Scottish Government's failure to implement the Scottish energy policy. And none of these things are wins of themselves, but some of the doors that the Just Transition Commission and the commissioners have managed to open are for us to kick down. And I guess that's what I want to start talking about, is what we do next to kick down some of those doors and to make clear that when we talk about worker-led solutions, we really mean business. And our movement has got to do something to get itself ready to be in the position that when we kick down those doors, we're ready with the answers that we're promising. And we've got some great examples. And like, BIFAB wasn't a universally successful campaign. It managed to keep the potential for fabrication alive, and keeping it alive was a thing in itself. And I supported that campaign. Obviously, the two unions, Unite and GMB, were leading it, and the shop stewards were leading it. And it was amazing to hear, after 3 months, civil service coming back with conclusions from inquiries and surveys and things that they'd done, which we'd been told by the shop stewards 3 months ago. build a ramp, include your training situation, get the mud off the floor and make it actually look like one of the competitors in the Vantia. All of those solutions were being provided by the shop stewards and the workers way before the civil servants came to that realisation. Or look at ADL, which incidentally was another thing that the Just Transition Commission agitated for in terms of the Scottish Government handing over decent-sized contracts to ADL in Falkirk running up to COP. The workers knew what they needed to do, as do the workers in Rolls-Royce in Ginnon. And I'm going to say something, I'm not normally very polite about our transport affiliates, but I'm going to be nice about them for a change. Like, my heart normally sinks. I had to go through to meet ministers like 4 times a quarter to talk about rail, ferries. Comrade Martin is with me in 2 of those meetings, aviation and buses, right? So actually, if you add those together, most of the unions that are involved in transport are also the same unions that are involved in energy to one. And they're a right moany bunch of bastards, right? Okay, it's like right pain in the arse, right? Okay, but they know their industry, cog by wheel, by track, by... There was no civil servant in that meeting who was capable of coming up with the fact that Gordon and his colleagues and the other people didn't know 6 months ago. The solutions are there, the skills are there. As we do look forward to doing the same sort of thing as we're doing here and developing here for transport, this is what we need to be activating, and that needs an organising strategy. That means obviously using the leverage we've got with the Scottish Government, using the leverage that can provide with us for some companies to open doors where union organisation doesn't exist and improve the negotiating agenda where it does. And I guess when we move into these final sessions, that's what we want to start talking about. The project that we're looking at here does, of course, involve giving elevation and strength and power where unions are already well organised. But it also means exploring where we can organise, where we're not organised now, because one of the things we need to be honest about is it's not just a one-for-one jobs calculation that we make when we talk about developing in the green economy. It's about replacing decent jobs with decent jobs and unionised jobs with unionised jobs. And a lot of the workplaces out there are harder to unionise than the ones that we're currently active in. So there's 2 parts to this. It's not Scottish Renewables are having a great big conference, a big glossy conference. Actually, Richard Lockhead speaking at that. We invited him to speak at this, but we'll come back to that one. And I know what they're going to be saying. They're going to be doing straight numbers. They're going to be doing 30,000 jobs lost here, 30,000 jobs gained here. What sort of quality? Where will the power be to collectivise for the workers within that? And that's what we need to do next. And that's why, as well as events like this, as well as responding to the energy consultation, as well as doing what we can on the Just Transition Commission, we need to be organising. The STUC will be working in conjunction with people here. If people have got ideas for this, start talking about them in your workshops. What sort of training, what sort of support do people need to be bringing forward and organising these solutions? What do we need to be doing to support shop stewards to empower themselves with the bargaining agenda so that Just Transition becomes a mainstream bargaining issue for our workers in these areas? That's the kind of job. It's not there on a plate for us, but we do believe that the possibility exists for us to drive that forward. And that's really the kind of message I'd like to leave people with. And what I'd like people to start thinking about in that final workshop is, what do we need to make that reality? What can the STUC help with? What do we need from our union leaders? What do we need from our organising strategies? What are the tangible things that we need to do over the next couple of years so we can build the potential for power into real power and the potential to be the designers of the solutions into the people who actually deliver it?